Well, hello and welcome to this class on vegetable garden design. I am Michelle Brune and I run Forks in the Dirt here. I am so glad you're here for this free class. I can't wait to share some of my favorite tips and tricks, but also just the general basics, all within the framework of being able to grow your best garden the way you really want to grow it. Um, Again, I run Forks in the Dirt. It is a local food information hub. We talk about growing your own food, knowing your farmer, and then cooking and preserving that food year round so that you can eat closer to home. Even here in Minnesota, where I'm at, up north here. To that end, we also wrote Small Scale Homesteading, a book that's been very well received. I co wrote that with Stephanie Thorough. We go into detail about growing your own food on a small scale or urban modern homestead. And then we talk a lot about preserving that food, how to tap your maples, raise some chickens, and then also bring all that stuff into your home so that you can use it to keep your family a little healthier, have an overall healthier home. So if you're interested in that, I'll have more information at the end. But for now, let's just get talking about why we garden in general before we dig into some of the design pieces. So I think in general, so many people have been drawn to gardening lately because they really want to have a connection with nature. I think we're missing that as a kind of humanity in general, and we're realizing it. So we're being drawn back to nature. I definitely garden for that reason. I also just garden to grow closer to nature season over season. And then also, of course, to harvest that great food at the end of those seasons. I think gardens offer us this place and this space to experiment and to grow with nature in a way that no other real hobby or activity can. We can grow, learn about ourselves as well as nature through our gardens. So when we're thinking about designing these gardens, it is just a beautiful time to kind of dream and then be able to get those dreams onto paper, figure out how we're going to manifest these things. But we need to start with your garden goals. It doesn't matter what's trending anywhere. We want to look at what you and your family love to eat. We want to grow those things first. We want to make sure that those are covered before we add in any extras. So really important to just grow what you love. And if that means a certain meal, if that means canning for the winter, if that means growing all your own salads for the summer, there are lots of different ways to grow your own food. So use what you've done in the past to kind of lead you on in this planning process. So also really important to remember right from the start that gardens are part of nature. They're not separate from it. So guess what? They're going to be hit by pests and storms and all kinds of crazy climate chaos. This is part of the deal. We have to be able to roll with those punches a little bit and not expect perfection from our gardens or us as gardeners, because we are all, including our gardens, a work in progress. So here's just a basic outline for the class. We'll be going over those space considerations, styles, some basic design principles, and then the planning process itself, and then helping you actually dig in and manifest this beautiful garden that you've put your heart and soul into. So we're going to start with, where do we put our garden? A lot of people will ask me, where do I put my gardens, in the front yard or the backyard? And it really is a personal choice. It depends on what your goals are, again, but also what your space allows for. We have just a regular suburban lot that happens to be double deep. So we have more space maybe than some, but we don't have 40 acres, right? So we use everything we've got. In our front yard, as you can see in the photo there, is pretty sunny. It's got some great south sun exposure. So we use that to grow a lot of edible fruits, and then some vining, pumpkins and squash that aren't eaten by most of the rabbits. Nothing really bugs it, so it doesn't need to be fenced in. It makes a great, super easy front yard garden. In our backyard, we tend to feel a little bit more private. We can maybe experiment some more. It might not be as tidy as our front yard garden, but you need to be able to grow where the sun and the soil permit. Sometimes there are some restrictions, so just double check with your city on that. And ordinances that would maybe affect the backyard garden would be more related to not being able to put a shed or something too close to a property line. Sun is absolutely essential to plant life and all life on this beautiful planet of ours. So we want to make sure we have enough sun coming to our plants. So we need at least 10 hours for most sun-loving vegetable crops. Some shade crops can take 6 to 8. But in general, if we're going to be putting in a vegetable garden, we want to have it where it's sunny. So we sun map to figure out how many hours of sunlight we have. Sun mapping means you basically put either a chair or a stake or even just dig a shovel into the ground where you want that garden space. And you can even do a perimeter around it. Maybe you're debating between a couple different places, so put something in those spaces that you can see, then set a timer for every hour on the hour, and then look and see if there's sun on that. So start early in the morning and go till late at night, sun up to sundown, and see how many hours of sunlight you have in those areas. So that is really going to be a big determining factor for a lot of our garden spaces. Wildlife can also play quite a role. You don't want to be putting your garden right where the squirrels all nest, or where there's a bird feeder that the squirrels are continually going to, next to a bunny den or something like that. Or if you've got deer in your area, try and keep it away from their immediate pathways. Which leads into fencing. We definitely recommend fencing for most vegetable gardens. There's nothing worse than having this big, beautiful crop, and then all of a sudden, the night before you're going to harvest it, the rabbits do. So fence can be as simple as as temporary as putting stakes in with some chicken wire around it. If you're testing out a garden space for the first year, by all means try that. But if you're going for something more permanent, you're also going to want to think about that garden location and the line of sight. If you do put up a fence, if that's going to be blocking anything behind it that you don't want it to block. But fencing is essential, I would say, for most of our crops. Sometimes you can get away with raising the beds, and the rabbits will leave it alone. It just kind of depends on your area and your wildlife. You're also definitely going to need some water for those plants. So think about how you're going to get the water to those plants. We have a double deep lot, and our garden is in the very back corner. That means I was hauling hoses for a lot of years before we were able to get some more permanent water source back there. So think about how you're going to get the water back and forth to your plants. If you've got a rain barrel that's a water collection close by, that's wonderful. Otherwise, you're going to have to really think about how you're going to get it wet. Soil is another absolutely essential piece of this garden puzzle. We want to make sure that we have got decent soil wherever we're growing. So basically, you can tell if it's okay soil if other things are growing there. If nothing else is growing, you might want to take a look at getting a soil test. Soil tests are very reasonably priced, usually under $20, and most often available from your extension service. So most state universities have extension services that you can send in a soil sample, and they will tell you very valuable information on anything is really out of line with the typical growing conditions. You can also purchase at-home soil tests to give you a broad idea if anything's really not in line. But definitely consider a soil test if you're brand new and growing things for the first time on your property. Soil is absolutely alive. There are over 1 billion microorganisms, so bacteria, fungi, nematodes, all those things, living in a teaspoon of soil. That's really hard to wrap our heads around, I think. And all of those things are interacting, and they want to interact with the roots of the plants we're planting. So in order to keep those guys happy, all those things that are continually growing and feeding on organic matter, we want to feed it compost and other organic matter so that we're building our soil and building our soil life. I go much more in depth on this on some blog posts on my website. So permaculture is just something I wanted to touch on. It's a way of looking at gardening that maybe is setting up systems to take care of the garden itself a little bit better. It's called stacking functions also, where, as you can see in this photo, there's a beautiful grapevine going over our entrance arbor to the vegetable garden. But in front of that, I've got some perennial pollinator plants. So the pollinators are coming in. The grapevine is a wonderful host for some taconid flies that are great to attack some of the other beetles and pest insects in the garden. And then at the end of the year, not only have I collected bouquets from the flowers, I also get to get grapes to juice and feed our family throughout the winter. So there's many functions from some of these things that are make it easier in general to take care of. It's really a way of caring for everything when we're setting up these garden systems with permaculture. Toby Hemingway wrote a great book on this. It's called Gaia's Garden. It's an older book, but it is still kind of the quintessential go-to book for permaculture. So let's kind of figure out some of these garden styles to get our brains thinking how we want our gardens to look. So in ground, very easy, very fast to do. So fast and easy, even a kindergartner can do it. This is my son many years ago. He brought home some bean plants and he really wanted to get those in the ground. I had a little space to the side in our side garden area, so we just dug in, got the weeds out, and put in a little bit of compost, and he got growing. And it was so easy and so fun for him to feel like he could really do that on his own. So in ground will depend a little bit on how your soil condition looks from the beginning. So if you've got really clay soil that's going to hold a lot of water, might not be the best option. We'll get to some better options for you in a little bit. So container gardens are a great beginner garden as well. You can really control the soil because you're bringing it all in. You can move them around. It's easy to put even on a deck or a patio or a balcony. This is a really great gateway gardening method. They're also movable to the point where I've had friends that grow tomatoes in pots, but they put the pots on a wagon and move the wagon back and forth to make the most of their sun. So you can get really creative with these gardens as well. Straw bale gardens are another fun option if you don't know if you're going to be able to plant in ground again the same spot next year or something like that, or if you just have a really bad soil that you're dealing with. These are very popular in schoolyards as well because kids just get a little bit more engaged in a slightly different way of growing in here. So you start a straw bale garden by soaking them down, really, really soaking them down, and then adding a little soil and a little fertilizer to kind of get it cooking, to get it starting to decompose. Then it actually warms up and you're able to plant in there a little sooner and the plants stay warmer longer. This does take a lot of watering as the water evaporates quickly, but drip irrigation is a way to make that a lot easier. At the end of the season, you're left with a beautiful compost to use anywhere else in your garden as well. So raised beds, very popular right now, and for good reason. You have this beautiful balance of having a little bit more control because you're bringing in the soil, so you've got better drainage. You're able to start a little bit sooner because they are raised, and so the sun warms those edges a little bit more than in ground. It also lends itself really nicely to adding some season extension, so some hoops and some plastic over there because you've got the side anchors to kind of brace against. And if you're raising them up even higher, you're going to have easier access as well for people that don't want to bend over quite as much. And vertical gardening. I love vertical gardening so much I have a whole nother class on it. This is a beautiful way to marry form and function. So you are bringing some beauty into the garden, you're adding some visual interest, and you're also giving plants what they really need, which is a place to hang and drape down off of. You're giving them more airflow and a lot of times even more sunlight. They're able to capture that sun as it's coming from the south. So we want to make sure we're putting this on the north end of any beds that we are creating so it doesn't block sun from other sun-loving plants. So one thing I also think of is when you're putting it at the back or the north end of a garden, you want to make sure that you've got a decent pathway behind you so it's not blocking space-wise. So you're going to actually be able to walk behind it as well because things grow out from these quite a lot. Those are some really fun tromboncino squash hanging from that wooden arbor in the middle. And then way at the back of that garden, I've got some floating arches, just from cattle panel. Anyway, I love vertical gardening, definitely space saving. I grow so much more food in my gardens because I grow up. Edible landscaping, I wanted to touch on here as well, as a way to, even if you're going to have a separate space for a vegetable garden, putting edible plants into your existing landscapes, or creating like keystone plantings that are edible and then filling in around that, in a beautiful landscape like this, is definitely doable. We just need to be really aware of the plants that we're choosing. So we want to choose things like alliums, onions, garlics, and then beans are usually left alone decently. And then corn, because it's growing up, once it gets started, it's generally left alone, except for the squirrels. We all know squirrels are determined foragers of our backyard gardens. But a lot of this stuff will not need to be fenced in, which makes it a lot more visually appealing in a regular landscape. Hügelkultur is just a fancy sounding word for composting in place, is how I think of it. It's a way of using wood and other materials that you already have on your property. Usually we start with the biggest chunks of dead wood. We want it dead and dry, to put in the bottom of the bed. Then we kind of build it up with smaller sticks and maybe some other things we would actually put on a compost pile, kitchen scraps, yard waste. So we want that layering of greens and browns like we would on a compost pile, but we put it all right in there. The idea with this is that it slowly decomposes and it gives a great home for a lot of those soil microorganisms, to be interacting, and they're going to be happy. They're going to stick around because they've got lots of food to decompose. We want to finish that off always with a top layer of finished compost and soil. And it grows beautiful plants. It also has a little bit better water retention than if it was just all soil. All right, let's get into some of these garden design principles so we can tackle this stuff. So, in general, when we're talking about laying out a vegetable garden bed, we want it to limit it to 4 feet wide. So this is if we're putting in some raised beds or something like that, or even designing just a swerving, curving kind of a garden bed. 4 feet wide is going to be the best, unless you plan to put a paver or a stepping stone or something inside of it, because it's really hard to reach in more than 2 feet on each side. On the other end of that, we want to have a 2-foot minimum for our pathways in between. You can maybe get by with 18 inches if it's like the end, like a dead end, like little space that you just need to grow one little, or move one little bit. But at least 2 feet is going to be a minimum when you're trying to wheel a wheelbarrow or lug big bunches of things in and out of that space. This garden here is orientated north-south. So the very back of that garden is going to be the north end. So everything in my mind when I think about this garden is facing south, is to make the most out of that sunlight that comes at it in our northern hemisphere here. And so we want to have shorter plants and more sun-loving plants in the fronts of these beds, and again have those taller plants or trellises on the north end of any of these beds. And we want to make sure that we're planting with the mature size of all of these plants. So if we're adding some perennials in here, this becomes extremely important. Spacing again, I wanted to just talk a little bit. My garden does not follow spacing rules very well, but I'm in there a lot. When you cram more plants in, like square foot gardening tends to do compared to row gardening, you're going to end up limiting some of the airflow, which then is going to invite more pests, more possible disease, because plants aren't drying out completely in between watering or rains. So you just need to be a little bit more aware when you're crunching those plants in together, of what you're looking for signs of distress. Now, growing vertically can help that a little bit because there is just more airflow than on the ground. So it really needs to depend on what you're looking for in your kind of garden style. Do you want it to be very spacious and spaced out and orderly? Or can you have a little bit of a jungle garden come August? So think about that when you're laying out your plant spacing. And in general, plants will come with a tag that tells you how big they'll get. Really try and follow that as best you can. Or packets of seeds will tell you how much to space those seeds apart. They all have great information on them. Follow those to the best of your ability, or you can play with some square foot garden spacing that I'll show you in a little bit. So the garden planning process. Here we go. We're finally getting to this step-by-step part. So this is how I do it. This is how my brain works. I'm sure there's lots of different ways to describe this process, but sketch your shape and your size of your bed. So this means you're going out to the garden, you are measuring with a tape measure after you've sun mapped and you know that that space gets at least 10 hours of sun. And you're like, okay, I know that the beds that I want to put in are going to be 4 feet wide. So I'm going to go 2 of those plus 2 feet in the middle, or however it works for you. So you're going to kind of figure out what space you have and what beds you can fit in there. So we're going to get that diameter kind of rough sketched out on some graph paper. And I am a big fan of graph paper for this. I generally use 1 square of the graph paper to equal 1 square foot of actual garden space. Then we want to add hardscapes. And all a hardscape is something that's going to remain there. So if you do put in a garden bed and you build it with some wood or some metal, it's going to be there. That it would be considered a hardscape. But even before that, we can look at where the fence will be, where the gate will be, if there's a shed that you're building close by, to even a bird bath that's large and going to stay there. That would be considered a hardscape. And then I want you to stop and make copies of that, because that can be your base plan until you decide exactly where all those garden beds are going to go. Then once you've decided where those garden beds are going to go, you can make another copy, figure out where those are, and then after that, you can start filling in that garden plan with different plants. So hopefully you've kind of got a list of plants that you know you wanted to grow, or you know, I want to make salsa. So for salsa, I need XYZ. And you can start filling in with the space you have for the plants that you really want to grow. And start again with those shorter sun-loving plants in front and kind of build from there. I really find that's an easy way to figure out where you're going to grow. And then if you've got a trellis at the back and you know you want to grow your tomatoes up that, then that's where those go. So it really fills in very naturally and very easily. But you will revise so many times. I don't really think a garden plan is ever really done. I don't think it's supposed to be ever really done. So this is an example here of a very old school square foot garden plan. I think it was on growveg.com, and I know gardeners.com had a free version as well. So you could search for that to see if you can play around with some of this, if this is how you like it. This is very grid based, right? So it's telling you can have 1 tomato in this space, 16 onions or carrots or whatever those are in that space. So, it's a very much a grid, but it really is a great place to start for a lot of people. This design shape is called a keyhole shape of a garden. It's very efficient use of space because you can get at it from all these different sides, and yet it's very compact in general. If you are going to fence around it, again, maybe fencing for 2 gardens because gardening is a little bit addicting and we don't really love digging in new fence holes around here anyway. That's a lot of work. That's a big part of the work of gardening, I think, is keeping your vegetables safe on the inside. So this is a great way to kind of get you to start thinking about spacing here and what could go where. But in general, I just want you to remember that you don't need any of the fancy, colorful anything. This is a garden plan that's meant to help you manifest your garden dreams, right? So you don't need any technical, whatever, iPad drawing, although that's really fun and colorful, right? It really just needs to benefit you. So if you know you are a person who needs to know exactly that there's 7 tomatoes and 3 peppers going here, write that in on your garden plan. But if you're just like, no, I know the tomatoes are going to go here and the peppers are going to go here and with some onions there, that's all you need to put on your garden plan. This is really meant to benefit you so that it can get you thinking and planning, and then you'll know, I really don't have room for 17 tomato plants there, right? When you go to find them or when you start your seeds, it all works out. So here's another option, another example of a vegetable garden design. Colored, not colored, you choose. We can also in the future then play with some companion planting, succession planting, season extension, cover crops, crop rotation. And if this all sounds like gobbledygook, I've got lots of information on how to do a lot of these steps in the garden on my website. Make your garden a reality. Know that it's going to take a little time. We don't have to do it all in one day. So make sure that you are just enjoying what you've got going on. Gather your tools, get your helpers involved, and make it kind of an experience. So harvesting really quick greens and herbs in the morning before the sunlight sucks all the nutrients and smells out of the herbs and wilts those lettuces and tomatoes and beans and almost everything else. We really want to wait until they're dry. So don't harvest after a rainy day. Wait until things dry out. You won't invite as much disease into your garden then. But mostly, I just want you to get out into that garden, enjoy the fruits of your labor, and harvest. Enjoy the space, watch the bumblebees coming through, feel nature, get your hands in the dirt, and enjoy it. That's really what I have for today. Thank you so much for hanging out. If this has sparked any questions, let's stay connected or let's get connected. I'm on my website is forksinthedirt.com, and I'm also on social media, Instagram, and then Facebook is Forks in the Dirt MN because I am in Minnesota. And if you have any questions, you can also directly email me at michelle@forksinthedirt. Thank you so much for hanging out. I hope this really helps you grow the best garden ever.